Dane Calder had crossed half the Perseus spur without seeing another living soul. Empty lanes meant no inspections, no questions, and no one reminding him that he used to be something other than a cargo hauler with a ship held together by stubbornness and mismatched bolts. He had flown the same cargo route for years, long enough to know when something didn't belong, at least not this close to the Asterion exclusion zone. The escape pod drifted at the edge of his display, turning slowly in open space with no signal and no heat. He eased the wayfarer toward it. The metal pod carried deep scorch lines that cut across the surface. Whatever hit it had done so with intent. He matched its rotation and locked it to the airlock. The ship vibrated with the connection. Dane stood there for a moment, hand on the release panel. He lived alone for a reason. He liked problems he could fix with tools and time. This was not that kind of problem. He cycled the airlock and opened the hatch. Cold air drifted out in a thin wave. Two small figures sat inside under emergency blankets. Their skin held a pale glow that marked them as Asterion. The light along their arms and faces shifted in slow patterns that showed fear and exhaustion. The older child lifted her head. She had a narrow face and bright eyes that followed every movement Dane made. Her markings brightened when she shifted to shield the younger child beside her. She looked young, but her posture was steady. The younger child pressed close to her side. His glow was faint and uneven. He held the blanket tight and watched Dane with wide, tired eyes. Dane crouched at the edge of the pod. He kept his voice even. "You're safe now." The girl studied him. Her glow steadied, but she didn't move. "Are you taking us back?" "I don't know where back is," Dane said, "but I'm not leaving you out here." She hesitated, then nodded once. She helped the younger child stand. He leaned against her, unsteady on his feet. Dane stepped aside to give them room. They moved into the airlock together, staying close. He sealed the hatch and guided them toward the small cabin near the front of the ship. The cabin was simple: 2 seats, a narrow bunk, and a storage wall. It wasn't meant for guests, but it was warm and quiet. The girl looked around the room before speaking again. "I am Lira," she said. "This is Kael." He nodded. "I'm Dane." Kael held Lyra's hand. His markings flickered with worry. Lyra's glow dimmed as she watched Dane check the scanners again. The display showed empty space, but Dane didn't trust it. Pods didn't drift this far without a reason. Lyra's voice was soft. "Will they find us?" He looked at them, an understanding of why they were in that pod beginning to take form in his mind, and asked, "Will who find you?" Lyra's voice was quiet. "I don't know who they are." He looked at the screen again. "Not if I can help it." Lira watched him for a long moment. Her glow shifted to a faint, steady pattern. Trust, maybe, or something close to it. Dane wasn't sure he deserved it. But he knew one thing: he wasn't turning away from them now. He watched the scanner until the thin line of the escape pod disappeared from the feed. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the small, cold prick of something wrong. The pod had no transponder, no registry code, and the scorch marks told a story he did not want to read. He keyed the comm and ran a sweep. A blip answered on the edge of the sweep, faint and moving fast. Not a routine freighter. The signature had the hard, clipped shape of a star fighter. Dane's jaw tightened. Those ships did not drift near the Asterion exclusion zone by accident. He closed the cabin hatch and moved to the cockpit. The wayfarer hummed under his hands. He thumbed the manual controls and brought up the nav overlay. The ship was closing in on the pod's last known vector. If it reached the debris field first, questions would follow. Questions meant records. Records meant trouble. Dane set the wayfarer to drift, then cut the external beacons. He killed the ship's transponder and dimmed the running lights. The cockpit went darker, the displays a soft glow. He kept the engines warm enough to maneuver but quiet enough to hide. He had run this route long enough to know how to vanish. He keyed a short message to an old contact on the outer lane. The message was a single line: Pod secured, needs safe harbor, no details. Unsure if his contact would answer. The reply came back in a single beat. A safe harbor 2 jumps down the spur. No questions. No registry. Dane let out a breath he'd been holding. He set a course that would take them through a narrow corridor of gravity wells and debris, routes the big ships avoided and the scanners had trouble reading. He moved through the ship with practiced calm. Lira sat on the bunk, knees drawn up, watching him. Kael slept against the blanket, small and still. Dane checked the seals, the life support, the emergency rations. He packed a small kit, a med patch, a thermal blanket, a hand tool set. He left the heavy cargo where it was. He did not want to draw attention. The nav overlay showed the star fighter closing. It would reach the pod's last vector in minutes. He engaged the Wayfarer's silent drive and eased the ship into the corridor. The stars outside smeared into thin lines. The ship shivered as it threaded between a field of broken hulls and frozen ice. The corridor chewed at the ship's sensors. The overlay flickered, and the starfighter's signature shifted from solid to static. He kept his hands steady. He thought of the children in the cabin and of the old life he had left behind. He thought of the years of service he had given to the king and queen and their empire. Old habits from his military training kicked in. The starfighter's blip wavered, then split. 2 signatures, one moving to intercept, the other sweeping wide. He adjusted course, slipping deeper into the debris. He cut power to non-essential systems and let the Wayfarer drift on the edge of detection. The scout's sensors pinged the field and returned noise. For a moment the overlay showed nothing but static. A warning tone sounded in the cockpit. A microburst of energy had grazed the Wayfarer's aft plating. He felt the ship shudder. He kept the voice in his head low and steady. He did not want to scare the children. He did not want to show fear. He sent a short, false beacon toward the scout's sweep, a small echo that looked like a derelict freighter. The ship took the bait. Its course shifted. He watched the signature move away. The Wayfarer slipped through the last of the debris and into a narrow lane of dark matter that ate most scans. Dane did not relax until his contact's harbor came up on the nav and the beacon blinked green. He eased into the harbor's shadow and opened a private channel. The contact's voice was low and quick. "You got passengers?" "Yes," Dane said. 2 Asterion children injured." "Bring 'em in, Dock 3, no questions." He guided the Wayfarer to the assigned dock. The harbor's crew moved with silence. They took the children with hands that did not pry. A medic checked Kael and Lira and gave a curt nod. The harbor's manager met Dane at the airlock and offered a single line of business: repairs, supplies, and a route off the spur if he wanted it. He thought of the children's small hands and the steady glow of Lira's markings. He shook his head once and said, "Not yet. I'm staying." The manager did not press. Dane watched the harbor doors close behind the Wayfarer. Outside, the spur stretched on, empty. Inside, 2 children slept under a thin blanket. He sat in the cockpit and wondered what he had gotten himself into and what to do next. Dane stayed in the cockpit long after the harbor crew finished their work. The Wayfarer sat in the shadow of the dock, quiet, but his mind kept circling the same truth. Whoever launched that pod had meant for it to disappear. Whoever chased it would not stop because the trail went cold. And whoever those children were, they were worth killing for. He stood and moved back toward the cabin. Lira sat awake, her back against the wall, Kael curled against her side. The medic had cleaned the small cuts on their arms and given them a mild stabilizer. Their markings glowed in soft, steady pulses now, no longer frantic. Lira watched him enter. Her eyes were sharp, too sharp for a child her age. "Are we leaving?" she asked. "Soon," Dane said. He kept his voice even. "We can't stay here long." She nodded as if she already understood. Kael stirred and pressed closer to her. His glow brightened for a moment, then dimmed again. Dane crouched beside them. "You're safe for now. The people here won't ask questions." Lira studied him, "But others will." He didn't answer, he didn't need to, she already knew. The harbor crew had left a few extra supplies, ration packs, a water filter, a thermal wrap. Quiet generosity, the kind given by people who understood what it meant to run. He prepared the wayfarer for departure. Lira sat in the cabin holding Kael's hand, comforting him. She acted with care, but there was a firmness in her movements that reminded Dane of soldiers he had served with long ago. People who had learned too early that the world could turn dangerous without warning. Dane sealed the hatch. The hum of the engines returned, low and familiar. He set a course away from the spur, away from the harbor, away from anything that might lead the people looking back to them. Lira stood beside his chair, watching the stars shift on the display. "Where are we going?" "A place I know," Dane said. "Quiet off the lanes. No one bothers anyone there." "Your home." He hesitated. Home was a word he hadn't used in years. Something like that. She accepted the answer without pressing. Kael climbed into the second seat and curled up, the blanket wrapped around him. His glow steadied as the ship slipped into the dark. Dane guided the wayfarer through a narrow corridor of dust and drifting asteroid rock. The engine stayed low, the ship moving like a shadow. He kept one eye on the scanner, waiting for any signature to reappear. It didn't. Hours passed, the familiar outline of his remote world came into view. A small, quiet place with scattered settlements and long stretches of open land. A place forgotten by most of the spur. A place where a man could disappear if he wanted to. Dane keyed the descent sequence. The wayfarer broke through the thin cloud layer and settled toward the landing pad near his cabin. The settlement lights glowed faintly in the distance, small and steady. Lira leaned forward, watching the ground rise to meet them. "Is it safe?" "As safe as anywhere," Dane said. The ship touched down with a soft thud. Dane powered down the engines and sat there for a moment, listening to the cooling metal. He had lived alone for years. He had built a life that required nothing from anyone and offered nothing in return. Now 2 children sat behind him, waiting for him to decide what came next. He stood and opened the hatch. Cool air drifted in, carrying the quiet of the open land. Lira stepped out first, Kael closed behind her. Their markings glowed faintly in the dim light. Dane watched them take in the small cabin, the empty yard, the stretch of land beyond. It wasn't much, but it was his, and for now it was theirs too. He closed the hatch and locked it. The decision settled in his chest with a weight he didn't try to shake off. Whatever came next, he would face it here. With them. Dane woke before sunrise, the quiet of the open land settling around the cabin like a familiar weight. He had slept in the chair near the door, boots still on, one eye open for any sound that didn't belong. The children slept in the small room down the hall, curled together under a blanket the harbor crew had given them. Their markings glowed in slow, steady pulses that filled the dark with a faint light. He stepped outside and let the cool air clear his thoughts. The settlement sat a short walk from his cabin, a cluster of low buildings and scattered homes built from whatever materials people could salvage. The land stretched wide and empty, broken only by the thin line of the ridge to the east. It was a quiet place, a forgotten place. That was why he had chosen it. When he returned inside, Lira was awake. She sat on the edge of the bunk with Kael leaning against her shoulder. She looked up as Dane entered. "Is this your world?" she asked. "It's where I live," he said, "for now." She nodded, accepting the answer. Kael rubbed his eyes and blinked at the room. His glow brightened when he saw Dane, then settled again. Dane made a simple breakfast, ration bread warmed on a small heater, dried fruit and water. Lira watched every step, as if learning the routine. Kael ate slowly, his movements careful. Their markings shifted in soft patterns that he was beginning to understand. Calm, curiosity, a faint thread of worry beneath both. When they finished, Dane stepped outside with them. The settlement was already waking. A Relin moved along the path, its stone like skin catching the early light. A Vishari adjusted a stack of crates near the supply shed, its reflective eyes tracking the children with quiet interest. A Koru carried a bundle of metal rods across a yard. Lira stayed close to Dane, her hand resting lightly on Kael's shoulder. She watched each passer-by with sharp attention, but her markings stayed steady. Kael pressed against her side, his glow faint but calm. Avelin paused near them. Its voice was low and even. "New arrivals." "Just passing through," Dane said. The Relin nodded once and continued on its way. No questions, no curiosity, that was the way of this place. People came and went, no one pried. He led the children toward the small market square. A few stalls were open, offering tools, food, and spare parts. The air carried the quiet rhythm of routine, voices low, movements steady, nothing rushed. Lira watched everything, her eyes moving from one species to the next. Kael held her hand and stayed close. A Veshari vendor lifted a hand in greeting. "Morning, Dane. Haven't seen you in a while." "Been off-world," he replied. The vendor's gaze shifted to the children. "Yours?" "No, just helping them get settled." The Veshari nodded, accepting the answer without comment, handing Dane a small packet of dried fruit. For them, no charge. Lira's markings brightened in a soft, grateful pattern. Kael's glow flickered with shy curiosity. He took the packet and gave a small nod. "Thanks." They walked back toward the cabin as the sun rose higher. The land warmed, the quiet settling into its usual rhythm. Lira looked up at Dane. "People here don't ask much." "That's why I live here," he replied. She considered that, then looked out at the open land. "It feels still." "It is, most days." Kael tugged at Lira's sleeve and pointed toward a small patch of ground near the cabin where a few hardy plants grew. Lira crouched beside him, showing him how to touch the leaves without breaking them. Their markings glowed in soft, curious patterns. Dane watched them for a long moment. Two children who had been launched into space to die were now kneeling in the dirt outside his cabin, learning the shape of a quiet world. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time since finding the pod, the air around him felt steady. The settlement would accept them. The land would hide them. And he would keep them safe. For as long as he needed to. Dane never planned to raise children. He had built his life around quiet routines and long stretches of work that kept him away from people. But the days after bringing Lira and Kael home settled into a rhythm he didn't expect. At first, everything felt temporary. He kept the Wayfarer fueled and ready, convinced he might need to run at any moment. He checked the scanners each morning before the sun rose. He watched the lanes for any signatures. He slept lightly, boots near the door. But the danger never came. And the children stayed. Weeks turned into months, months stretched into years. Lira grew taller, her posture steady and alert. Her markings shifted with more control now, no longer flashing with fear at every sound. She learned the routines of the cabin, how to check the water filter, how to sort the ration packs, how to help Kael with his morning tasks. She watched Dane closely, copying the way he moved through the day. Kael grew quieter but not withdrawn. He followed Lira everywhere, his small hand often wrapped around her sleeve. His glow stayed soft and warm when he felt safe. It brightened when he laughed, a rare sound that always caught Dane off guard. He taught them what he knew. How to mend a cracked panel. How to read the weather on the ridge. How to listen for the hum of a failing power cell. Simple things, practical things. Lira learned fast. She asked questions that made him pause, questions about the stars, the lanes, the ships that passed too far overhead to see. Kael learned by watching. He sat beside Dane during repairs, handing him tools with small, careful movements. The settlement accepted them without fuss. Avelin showed Lira how to stack stone for a garden wall. A Veshari taught Kael how to fold thin sheets of metal into simple shapes. Akoru let them ride in the back of a supply hauler on quiet afternoons. No one asked where they came from. No one asked why they stayed. That was the way of this place. Dane kept the truth close. He never spoke of the pod drifting in the dark, and the children didn't ask. One evening, after a long day repairing a broken water line, Dane sat on the steps outside the cabin. The sky above the ridge glowed with the last light of sunset. Lira sat beside him, legs crossed, her markings shifting in slow, calm waves. Kael leaned against Dane's side, half asleep. Lira looked up at him. "You always watch the sky," she said. "Old habits," Dane said. "From before." He nodded once. "Before." She didn't press. She only rested her hand on Kael's shoulder and watched the sky with him. Kael stirred and murmured a soft word in Asterion. Dane didn't know the language well, but he knew the tone. It was the same tone he had heard from children in the barracks long ago, a word spoken to someone trusted, someone steady. Lira smiled. "He means you." Dane felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Not heavy, just real. The years had changed them. They had changed him too. He wasn't just hiding them anymore. He was raising them. And he knew, without needing to say it, that he would protect them for as long as he lived. The seasons shifted across the open land, each one settling over the settlement with the same quiet rhythm. He marked the years by the height of the ridge grass and the way the wind changed at dusk. Lira marked them by the length of her stride. Kael marked them by how far he could climb before Dane told him to come down. Life settled into something steady. Lira helped with repairs now, her hands sure and quick. She could strip a panel, check a seal, and reassemble a junction without needing Dane to guide her. Her markings glowed in calm, focused patterns when she worked. Kael followed her everywhere, carrying small tools in a pouch slung across his shoulder. His glow brightened whenever Dane praised him. They were growing, and he felt the weight of that more each day. One night a storm came in fast from the ridge, a wall of dark clouds rolling across the open land. He had seen storms like this before. They hit hard, then vanished as if they had never been there. He moved through the cabin, checking the shutters and securing the tools outside before the wind picked up. Lira and Kael helped without being asked. Lira carried the smaller crates inside, her movements quick and sure. Kael gathered the scattered hand tools, his glow flickering with focus as he tried to keep up with her pace. The first crack of thunder shook the ground. Kael froze. His markings flared in a sharp, frightened pulse. Lira stepped beside him, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. "It's just noise," Dane said. "Loud, but it won't reach us in here." Kael nodded, but his glow stayed bright and uneven. The wind hit next, rattling the shutters. Rain swept across the yard in heavy sheets. The cabin creaked under the force of it. Dane lit the backup lantern and set it on the table. The warm light filled the room, softening the edges of the storm outside. Lira sat near the window, watching the flashes of lightning. Her markings shifted in slow, thoughtful patterns. Kael climbed onto the bench beside her, but each thunderclap made him flinch. Dane sat across from them, keeping his voice calm. "Storms will pass. They always do." Another crack of thunder hit, louder than the rest. Kael startled hard and scrambled off the bench. He ran straight to him and pressed himself against his side, small hands gripping Dane's shirt. He steadied him with one arm. "Easy, you're all right." Kael buried his face against Dane's chest. His glow pulsed in quick, frightened bursts. Lira watched them, her expression softening. She moved closer and sat beside them on the floor, her markings shifting into a steady, calming rhythm. Kael whispered something in Asterion, quiet, trembling but clear. He didn't understand the word, not fully, but he felt the weight of it in the way Kael held onto him. He looked at Lira. She met his eyes. "He's calling for you," she said. The way we called for our father when we were scared. The storm rumbled overhead. Dane felt Kael's small hands tighten. The word came again, softer this time but certain. Lira rested her head against Dane's arm. "He means you," she said. "He's choosing you." He sat still for a long moment. The storm outside faded into background noise. All he could feel was the small weight of Kael pressed against him and the quiet certainty in Lira's voice. He had spent years keeping them safe, teaching them, holding the pieces of their lives together. He had told himself it was temporary. He had told himself someone else would come. But no one had. And the truth had grown in the quiet spaces between storms. Dane shifted his arm and held Kael closer. "All right," he said. "I'm here." Kael's glow steadied. Lira's markings brightened in a soft, warm pattern. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin the air felt still. Dane wasn't just the man who found them anymore. He wasn't just the one who kept them hidden. He was the one they reached for. And he knew, with a clarity that settled deep in his chest, that he would never let them face a storm alone. The quiet years did not erase his old habits. He still checked the scanners each morning before the sun rose. Most days showed nothing but the usual traffic, supply haulers, survey drones, the slow drift of debris along the outer lanes. But one morning the scanner picked up a faint signature on the far edge of the system. It was small, fast, and wrong. Dane watched the blip for a long moment. It moved in a tight pattern, sweeping the outer orbit as if searching for something. The signature faded before he could get a clear read, but the shape of its movement stayed with him. He shut the scanner off and stepped outside. The land was calm. Lira and Kael were near the garden wall, sorting stones for a small path they had decided to build. Lira's markings glowed in a steady rhythm as she worked. Kael hummed softly, his glow brightening each time he found a stone he liked. Dane walked toward them. "Stay close today," he said. Lira looked up. "Something wrong?" "Not sure yet." She nodded once. She didn't ask more. She had learned to read the tension in his voice. Later that afternoon, a supply hauler arrived from the Ridge settlement. The driver, a Koru with a low, steady voice, handed Dane a crate of parts and leaned in slightly. "Strangers asking questions," the Koru said. "Not locals, not traders." "What kind of questions?" "About any ships that pass through, about people who keep to themselves. 2 children." Dane felt the air tighten around him. "How long ago?" "Yesterday." The Koru didn't press. He only gave a slow nod and drove off, the hauler's engine rumbling across the open land. Dane carried the crate inside. Lira stood in the doorway watching him. "Is it them?" she asked. "I don't know," Dane said, "but we're going to be careful." That night he checked the Wayfarer's systems, making sure the silent drive still worked and the emergency supplies were stocked. He didn't want to run, but he needed the option. Kael sat on the floor nearby, sorting small metal pieces into neat rows. His glow was calm, unaware of the tension in the room. Lira stood beside Dane, watching him test the power relays. "Will they come here?" she asked. "Not if I can help it." She studied him for a moment, her markings dimmed in a thoughtful pattern. "We won't leave," she said, "not unless you say so." Dane paused. He looked at her, older now, steady, protective in a way that reminded him of the first day he found her in the pod. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. He closed the panel and set the tools aside. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," he said, "but we stay alert." The next morning the scanner showed nothing. The sky was clear. The settlement moved through its usual rhythm. But the quiet felt different now, thin at the edges, stretched over something unseen. Dane watched Lira and Kael walk toward the garden wall. Their markings glowed in soft, steady patterns. They trusted him. They trusted this place. He would not let anything take that from them. The threat was still distant. But it was real. and Dane felt the old instincts settle back into place. He had built a life for the children here. He would defend it, for as long as he had to. Queen Avelin stood at the edge of the command deck, watching the starfield shift as her ship moved through the outer lanes. She had crossed more systems than she cared to count, following fragments of reports and half-buried rumors. Most led nowhere. Some led to places she wished she had never seen. Her reflection hovered faintly in the viewport, pale luminous skin, bioluminescent markings along her arms and temples that pulsed in slow, controlled patterns, her posture straight, her eyes sharp from years of searching. She wore a simple travel coat over fitted armor, the kind meant for long missions rather than ceremony. She had not worn ceremonial robes since the night the palace fell. Avelin turned away from the viewport as her second officer approached. The officer, a turban with segmented joints that clicked softly when she moved, held a small data slate. "We found another report," the turban said. "Outer Spur, a remote world, sparse settlements." Avelin took the slate. The report was thin, just a passing note from a trader who claimed to have seen 2 Asterion children years ago. No names, no proof, only a description of pale skin and faint markings. It was more than most leads she had followed. "How old was the report?" Avelin asked. 6 years, the turban said. Avelin's markings dimmed in a slow, steady pattern. 6 years was a long time, but she had learned not to dismiss anything. The faction had scattered their agents across the spur. They erased trails as fast as she could follow them. "Set a course," Avelin said. "I want to see the world myself." The turban nodded and moved to the helm. The ship shifted, engines humming as it turned toward the coordinates. Avelin walked through the narrow corridor to her private cabin. The room was small, built for travel rather than comfort. A single console sat against the wall, its surface covered in maps, reports, and fragments of intercepted messages. She touched one of the maps, tracing the path she had taken over the years. She remembered the night she lost her children. The alarms, the smoke. The sound of the escape pod launching before she could reach it. Her markings brightened in a sharp, controlled pulse. She steadied her breath and forced them back to calm. She had followed every rumor since then. Every whisper. Every faint trace of Asterion light in places where it did not belong. Most were false, some were traps. But she kept going. She sat at the console and opened the trader's report again. The description was vague, but something about it held her attention. The trader had mentioned the children were with a human man, a quiet one, a man who kept to himself. Avelin leaned back in her chair. "Who are you?" she murmured. The ship dropped into a new lane, the stars shifting outside the viewport. The hum of the engines settled into a steady rhythm. Avelin closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured Lira's bright, curious markings, Kael's soft glow when he slept. She had held those images in her mind for years, refusing to let them fade. She opened her eyes again. "I'm coming," she said softly. The ship moved deeper into the spur, toward the forgotten world where a rumor waited. Avelin did not know what she would find, but she felt she was closer than she had been in a long time. And she would not turn back now. As they reached the planet, Avelin stood at the front of the shuttle as it descended through the thin cloud layer, the world below revealing itself in steady detail. Broad stretches of open land spread beneath her, broken by scattered homes built from mixed materials and long paths worn smooth by years of quiet use. Nothing about the place suggested danger, yet the calm surface made her markings tighten in a faint, controlled pulse. She had learned long ago that danger often hid behind stillness. When the royal shuttle settled on the landing pad, she stepped down before the engines finished cooling. The air carried a muted chill, the kind that came from open terrain and long distances. People moved through the area with a steady rhythm, focused on their work. A pair of turban adjusted a damaged solar array with practiced coordination. A Haskari repaired a fence line with the ease of experience. An Arakai carried a bundle of tools, the ribbon-like extensions on their shoulders shifting with quiet concentration. No one stared at her arrival. No one whispered, no one reacted at all. Avelin exchanged a glance with her second officer. "This place has learned to keep its eyes forward," she said. "Or it has learned to keep its secrets," the officer replied. Avelin walked deeper into the settlement. The buildings were simple but cared for, shaped by people who expected to stay. Tools were stored neatly. Gardens were tended with patience. The quiet here felt earned and natural. She followed a narrow path toward the outskirts. A small cabin stood apart from the others, set against a stretch of open ground. A low stone wall curved beside it, uneven in height, built by hands that had learned through repetition rather than instruction. The sight of it made her breath catch. Two children stood near the wall. Older now, taller but unmistakable. Lira sorted stones with a focus that reminded Avelin of the girl she had once held close, sharp-eyed, steady, always watching. Her markings shifted in calm, thoughtful patterns. Kael crouched beside her, choosing stones with quiet care, his glow brightening each time she nodded in approval. Avelin took a step forward. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. Her markings brightened in a sharp, involuntary pulse she could not control. Lira looked up first. She froze, her markings flickering in a startled rhythm. She reached for Kael, pulling him close with a protective arm. Kael pressed against her side, confused but trusting her lead. The cabin door opened. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, steady, dressed in worn work clothes that had seen years of use. His posture shifted the moment he saw her, not with fear or aggression, but with the quiet readiness of someone who had spent a long time keeping danger at a distance. He moved toward the children, placing himself between them and the unknown figure standing in the open field. Avelin studied him. The trader's report had mentioned a quiet human man, one who kept to himself. She had not expected him to stand like this, calm, grounded, protective in a way that struck her deeper than she wanted to admit. Lira tugged at his sleeve. "She's watching us," she whispered. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "Stay behind me." Avelin's markings dimmed, then brightened again in a slow, aching pattern. She took another step forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her breath. "Lira," she said. "Kael." The children stiffened. Kael's glow flickered in confusion. Lira's markings pulsed in a sharp, defensive rhythm. The man did not move aside. He did not speak. He stood as a quiet wall between her and the children she had crossed half the galaxy to find. Avelin kept her voice low. "I am Queen Avelin of Asterion," she said. "I have searched for you for a very long time. I am your mother." The wind moved across the open land. The children stared at her. The man remained steady, unyielding, protective in a way she had not prepared herself to face. Avelin felt her markings shift in a slow, hopeful pulse she could not hide. She had expected strangers. She had expected danger. She had expected a trap. She had not expected to find her children alive, healthy, and standing beside a man who guarded them with the quiet certainty of a parent. She stood in the open field, unable to move any closer. The children she had searched for across half the galaxy were only a few steps away, yet the space between them felt impossibly wide. Lira held Kael close, her markings shifting in sharp, protective patterns. Kael pressed against her side, his glow unsteady with confusion. Neither child reached toward Avelin. Neither child recognized her. The realization struck harder than she expected. The man kept his place in front of them, steady and grounded. His posture held no threat, yet he did not yield an inch. He watched Avelin with the quiet focus of someone who had spent years measuring danger before it reached his door. Avelin drew a slow breath. "I'm not here to harm them," she said. "I'll decide that," the man replied. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. He was not posturing. He was not bluffing. He was a man who had stood between these children and danger before, and he would do it again without hesitation. Avelin's markings dimmed in a slow, pained rhythm. "They are my children." Lira flinched at the words. Her markings brightened in a sharp pulse, then steadied as she tightened her hold on Kael. The boy looked up at the man instead of at Avelin, seeking reassurance in the only place he seemed to trust. Avelin felt something inside her twist. She had imagined this moment for years. She had pictured Lira running to her, Kael reaching for her, both of them remembering the warmth of her arms and the sound of her voice. Instead, they stood behind a stranger, their bodies angled toward him as if he were the center of their world. The man rested a hand on Lira's shoulder. "It's all right," he said. "Stay close." Lira nodded. Kael pressed against his leg, his glow softening as the man's presence steadied him. Avelin watched the exchange with a tightness in her chest she could not hide. Her markings flickered in a pattern she had not felt since the night she lost them: grief, relief, and something deeper. "How long have they been with you?" she asked. The man studied her for a moment before answering. "Years." Avelin swallowed. "They survived because of you." "They survived because they're strong," he said. "I only gave them a place to grow." Lira looked up at him, her markings shifting in a warm, familiar pattern. Kael reached for his hand without thinking. The man took it with the ease of someone who had done so 1,000 times. Avelin felt the impact of that small gesture like a blow. She stepped closer, slow and careful. "Lira," she said, "Kael, I have searched for you every day since the night you were taken from me." Avelin stopped. She did not want to frighten them. She did not want to push them further behind the man who stood between them and the world. She lowered her voice. "I am your mother," she said. "I never stopped looking for you." Lira's eyes softened, but her body stayed close to the man. Kael's glow steadied only when the man gave a small nod, as if telling him it was safe to listen. Avelin felt the truth settle over her, with a weight she had not prepared for. These children were hers by blood. But this man had become their anchor, their safety and their home. She had found them at last, yet she stood on the outside of their lives. Her markings dimmed in a slow, aching pattern. "Tell me your name," she said. Dane called her. She held his gaze. "You raised them." "I did what I could." Avelin looked at her children, older, stronger, alive, and felt a surge of gratitude and grief so tightly bound she could not separate one from the other. She had found them, but she had not expected to find this. Queen Avelin stood in the open field long enough for the wind to shift. The man kept his place between her and the children, steady and grounded. Lira's markings flickered in a guarded rhythm. Kael stayed close to Dane's leg, his glow dim and uncertain. Avelin drew a slow breath. "May we speak inside?" she asked. Dane studied her for a long moment. His posture stayed firm, but something in his eyes shifted. He gave a small nod. "All right, come in." He guided the children toward the cabin. Lira kept her hand on Kael's shoulder, her steps cautious. Kael glanced back at Avelin once, then hid behind Dane again. Avelin followed them across the open ground. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the cabin was simple but lived in. Tools hung neatly on the wall. A small table held a lantern and a stack of worn learning slates. The space carried the quiet order of a home shaped by routine and steady hands. Dane motioned toward a chair. "You can sit." Avelin remained standing for a moment, taking in the room. "You built a life here." "I gave them what they needed," Dane said. Lira stood near the table, her posture tense. Kael stayed close to Dane, his glow faint. Avelin lowered herself into the chair, careful not to move too quickly. "Lira," she said softly, "do you remember me?" Lira's markings shifted in a hesitant pattern. She looked at Dane first, then at Avelin. I remember light, she said, and voices, and someone holding me when I was scared. Avelin felt her breath catch. That was me. Lira didn't step closer, but she didn't turn away. Her markings steadied into a cautious rhythm. Kael peeked out from behind Dane. His glow brightened for a moment, then dimmed again. He took one small step toward Avelin, stopped, and looked up at him. Dane crouched beside him. "It's all right," he said. Kael took another step. His markings flickered in a nervous pulse. He reached out a hand toward Avelin, fingers trembling. She held still, afraid to break the moment. Kael's glow brightened. Then he pulled his hand back and ran straight into Dane's arms. He pressed his face against Dane's chest and whispered the Asterion word he used for father. Avelin felt the impact of it like a physical blow. Her markings dimmed, then brightened in a slow, aching pattern she could not hide. "He calls you that," she said. Dane held Kael steady. "It's what he chose." Lira stepped closer to Dane as well, her markings shifting in a protective rhythm. She looked at Avelin with a mix of caution and curiosity. "He takes care of us," she said. "He always has." Avelin swallowed. "Tell me," she said to Dane, "tell me everything." Dane stood and rested a hand on the back of a chair. "I found their pod drifting near restricted space. They were scared, hungry, alone. I brought them aboard and got them away from a ship that was tracking them." Avelin listened, her markings shifting with each detail. "I brought them here," Dane continued. "This world is quiet, forgotten. No one asks questions. I thought it would be for a few days, maybe a week, but weeks turned into months and into years, and they needed someone." Lira nodded. "He taught us how to fix things, how to read the weather, how to stay safe." Kael peeked up at Avelin again, then hid behind Dane's leg. Avelin felt her chest tighten. "You raised them to be strong." "I raised them to survive," Dane said. "The strength is theirs." Avelin looked at the children, older now, alive, and felt gratitude and grief twist together in a way she could not separate. "You protected them," she said. Dane met her gaze. "I did what anyone should have done." Avelin knew that wasn't true. She had seen too many worlds where no one stepped forward. She had seen what fear did to people, what power did, what loss did. But this man had taken two royal children into his home and built a life around them without asking for anything in return. Lira stepped a little closer to Avelin. "You said you're our mother." Avelin nodded. "Yes." Lira studied her markings, her posture, her voice. "I remember your light," she said. "Not clear, but I remember feeling safe." Avelin's breath trembled. "I have missed you every day." Lira didn't move into her arms, but she didn't step back either. Her markings softened in a cautious, hopeful pattern. Kael peeked out again. He whispered the parental word toward Dane, as if checking that the world was still steady. Avelin watched the exchange, and something inside her shifted. This man had become their center, their father in every way that mattered. And she felt the first quiet pull of something she had not expected: respect, gratitude, and the beginning of something she did not yet understand. Outside, the wind moved across the open land. Inside, the four of them stood in the small cabin, the shape of a new future forming in the quiet space between breaths. Avelin stood near the cabin window long after Dane finished speaking. The children had drifted to the far side of the room, sorting through their stones again, though their eyes kept flicking toward her in cautious glances. The quiet inside the cabin felt different now, charged, uncertain, but no longer closed. She turned toward Dane. "If I stay," she said, "it will not put them in danger." Dane shook his head. "This world is quiet. It stays off most charts. If your ship leaves orbit, no one will think to look here." Avelin hesitated. "I would like to stay, not as a queen, not as a threat, only as their mother." Dane studied her for a long moment. His posture stayed steady, but something in his expression softened. "If that's what you want, then stay." Avelin tapped her wrist device and sent a short command. The reply came seconds later, her ship acknowledging her order to depart and hold position at a distant relay point. She watched the confirmation fade from the screen, then lowered her arm. She was here, truly here. When she turned back, Lira was watching her with a guarded curiosity. Kael peeked from behind the table, his glow faint but steady. Avelin lowered herself to sit on the floor near them, leaving space so they could choose the distance. "May I stay with you for a while?" she asked. Lira exchanged a look with Dane, then gave a small nod. "You can." Kael didn't speak, but he didn't hide either. Avelin felt her markings shift in a soft, hopeful pattern. Evening settled slowly over the cabin. Dane cooked a simple meal. The children moved through their routines with practiced ease, setting out cups, checking the heater, clearing the table. Avelin watched them with a quiet ache in her chest. They were confident, capable, steady in ways she had not expected, ways that a life in a palace never would have shown them. When they sat down to eat, Lira took the seat closest to Dane. Kael climbed into the chair beside him, leaning against his arm. Avelin sat across from them, careful not to intrude. Lira spoke first. "You said you looked for us." "I did," Avelin said, "every day." Lira's markings flickered in a thoughtful pattern. "Why did it take so long?" Avelin's breath caught. "Because the people who hurt your father hid their tracks well. They wanted me to believe you were gone." Kael looked up at that, his glow brightening in a small, startled pulse. "Gone." Avelin shook her head. "I never believed it, not for a moment." Kael's glow steadied. He looked at Dane for reassurance, and Dane gave a small nod. Only then did Kael return his gaze to Avelin. Lira studied her markings. "You're telling the truth." "Yes," Avelin said, "I am." Lira didn't smile, but her posture eased. Later, when the children slept, Dane stepped outside to check the night air. Avelin followed him, standing a short distance away. The land stretched quiet and open beneath the stars. The cabin behind them glowed with soft lantern light. "They're strong," Avelin said. "They had to be," Dane replied. Avelin looked at him. "You taught them." "I tried," he said. "Most days I was just keeping up." She let out a slow breath. "I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me anything," Dane said. "They needed someone, I was there." Avelin studied his posture, the steadiness, the quiet strength, the way he spoke without trying to impress or defend himself. She had met countless leaders, soldiers, and diplomats. None of them had ever spoken with this kind of simple certainty. She found herself stepping closer. "When the palace fell," she said, "my husband, the king of our world, had been killed. I was separated from them. I fought my way to the escape bay, but the pod had already launched. I saw it drift into the lanes. I thought I had lost everything." Dane didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort. He simply listened, and somehow that steadiness made it easier to speak. "I searched every system," Avelin continued. "Every outpost, every rumor. I followed trails that led nowhere. I walked into traps. I lost people who believed in me. But I never stopped." Dane nodded once. "I believe you." Avelin felt her markings shift in a soft, grateful pulse. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the night settling around them. "You built a life here," she said. "I built what they needed," Dane replied. Avelin looked toward the cabin window, where the faint glow of the children's markings flickered through the curtains. "They call you their father." Dane's jaw tightened slightly. "It wasn't something I asked for." "I know," Avelin said, "but they chose you." Dane didn't answer. Avelin stepped closer, her voice low. "I am grateful they had someone to choose." The next morning, the children warmed to her in small, careful ways. Lira asked her a question about Asterion constellations. Avelin drew them in the dirt outside the cabin, her markings shifting in a calm, teaching rhythm. Lira watched every line, her posture steady, her eyes bright with curiosity. Kael approached her with a small stone he had found. He held it out, then pulled it back, then held it out again. Avelin accepted it with both hands, her markings brightening in a soft pulse. Kael whispered the parental word toward Dane, as if checking that the world was still safe. Dane nodded. "It's all right." Kael looked at Avelin again. "You can keep it," he said. Avelin felt her breath tremble. "I will." Lira stood beside her brother. "We can show you the ridge later," she said, "if you want." "I would like that," Avelin said. The children didn't smile, but their markings softened. Dane watched from the cabin doorway, arms crossed, posture relaxed but attentive. Avelin met his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a shared wait, a quiet beginning. By nightfall, Avelin knew one truth with absolute clarity. She had found her children, but she had also found the man who had given them a life worth returning to. And she was not ready to leave. Not yet, not for a long time. Avelin woke to the sound of soft footsteps. When she stepped outside the cabin, she found Lira already in the yard, checking the small, weather-vane Dane had built with her years ago. The girl adjusted the angle with practiced hands, her markings steady and focused. "You do this every morning?" Avelin asked. Lira nodded. "It tells us when storms come. Dane taught me how to read the wind." Avelin watched her work. The girl's movements were confident, precise. "You're skilled," she said. Lira shrugged, but her markings brightened in a quiet pulse of pride. "We have to be. Dane says knowing the land keeps us safe." Avelin felt the words settle deep. He had not just sheltered them. He had taught them to stand on their own. Kael appeared next, carrying a small pack. He set it on the ground and opened it, revealing a neat set of tools. He checked each one, humming softly. "What are you doing?" Avelin asked. "Inventory," Kael said. "Dane says we check our tools before we use them." Avelin crouched beside him. "You're very organized." Kael's glow brightened. He looked up at her for a moment, then returned to his work with quiet focus. Avelin watched them both, feeling a slow ache rise in her chest. They were strong, they were capable. They were alive because someone had taught them how to be. And that someone was not her. Later that day, Lira led Avelin up the ridge behind the cabin. Kael followed close behind, carrying a small canteen. Dane walked a short distance back, giving them space but staying within reach. The ridge opened into a wide view of the settlement and the land beyond. Lira stood at the edge, her posture steady. "This is where we watch the storms," she said. "Dane says you can see trouble coming from here." Avelin looked out across the open land. "It's beautiful." "It's safe," Lira said, "most of the time." Kael tugged at Avelin's sleeve. "We found a nest here once," he said. "Dane helped us move it so the wind wouldn't break it." Avelin smiled softly. "He sounds very patient." Kael nodded. "He is." Lira glanced at Dane, then at Avelin. "He taught us everything." Avelin felt her markings shift in a slow, heavy pattern. "I can see that." Lira hesitated, then stepped closer. "I don't remember much from before," she said, "but I remember feeling safe. I think that was you." Avelin's breath trembled. "I hope so." Lira nodded once. "You can stay with us if you want." Avelin felt the words strike deep. "I would like that." That night after the children slept, Avelin and Dane sat outside near a small fire pit. The flames cast soft light across the yard. The land was quiet. Dane stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "I always knew this day might come." Avelin turned toward him. "What day?" "The day someone came looking for them," he said. "Their family, their people, someone who could give them what I couldn't." Avelin felt her markings dim. "You thought they would leave you." "I didn't want them to," Dane said, "but I knew they weren't mine to keep." Avelin studied him. His posture was steady, but there was a weight behind his words that she had not seen before. You raised them, she said. I raised them because they needed someone, Dane replied. But I never forgot they had a life before me, a life I couldn't replace. Avelin looked toward the cabin window, where the faint glow of the children's markings flickered behind the curtains. You gave them more than safety. I gave them what I could, Dane said, but I always knew it might not be enough. Avelin felt something shift inside her. Not pity, not gratitude, something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to name. You were more than enough, she said quietly. Dane didn't answer. The next day, Avelin watched as Lira and Kael moved through their chores. Lira repaired a loose hinge on the cabin door with steady hands. Kael climbed the small storage ladder with practiced balance, retrieving a crate without hesitation. They worked together with a rhythm that spoke of years of shared effort. Avelin approached them. You two are very capable. Lira nodded. Dane says we should know how to do things ourselves. Kael added, he says strength keeps us safe. Avelin felt her markings brighten in a soft, aching pulse. He taught you well. Lira looked at her. He takes care of us, but we take care of him too. Avelin felt the truth of that settle deep. This was not a one-sided bond. This was a family. That evening, Avelin stood alone outside the cabin, watching the children chase each other across the yard. Their markings glowed bright with laughter. Dane leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, posture relaxed as he watched them. Avelin felt the realization settle with absolute clarity. She could not take them from him. Not without breaking something essential in them. Not without breaking something in herself. They were hers by blood, but they were his by life. And she understood for the first time that her place in their future would have to be built beside him, not in place of him. She looked at Dane, he looked back, neither spoke. But the understanding between them was unmistakable. Dane checked the scanner before sunrise, the way he always did. The cabin behind him was quiet, and the early wind moved through the ridge grass in slow, steady waves. Everything looked the same as it had for years, but the scanner told a different story. A sharp pulse appeared on the edge of the system, small and fast, sweeping the lanes in a tight pattern he recognized far too well. He watched it repeat once, then again, and the old instinct he had tried to bury settled heavy in his chest. He shut the scanner off and stepped inside. Avelin was already awake. She stood near the table, her posture straight, her markings faint but alert. Something changed, she said. What did you see? A ship, Dane said. Not local, not a trader, it's sweeping the outer lanes. Avelin touched her wrist device, listening as a soft tone answered her. Her markings brightened in a sharp pulse as she absorbed the message. My ship confirms it. 2 hostile vessels entered the system. They followed my trail. Dane felt the air shift. They're here for the children. They're here for all of us, Avelin said. If they find this settlement, they won't hesitate. Dane looked toward the children's room. Then we don't stay. Avelin held his gaze. You want to leave the planet. It's the only way to keep this place safe, Dane said, and the only way to keep them out of danger. Avelin nodded once, then we leave. Lira stepped into the room, her markings flickering in a worried rhythm. What's happening? Kael followed close behind, moving straight to Dane and gripping his shirt with both hands, his glow dim and uneven. Avelin knelt beside them. We have to go, she said, right now. Lira looked at Dane. Are we in danger? We will be if we stay, he said, but we're leaving before they get close. Kael pressed his face against Dane's side. On the ship. Yes, he said, on the Wayfarer. Kael's glow steadied at the sound of his voice. Lira nodded, her posture straightening with quiet resolve. They moved quickly without panic, each of them falling into the roles they had learned over the years. Dane loaded emergency packs into the Wayfarer, checking each latch and seal with practiced precision. Avelin coordinated with her ship through short, clipped transmissions, her markings shifting in sharp, focused patterns. The children stayed close to Dane, their movements small and tense, their markings flickering with unease. Avelin watched Dane work. His hands moved with a confidence she had not seen before, each motion deliberate and efficient. He checked the hull, the stabilizers, the silent drive, the fuel lines. He moved like someone who had done this under pressure more times than he cared to admit. "You've done this before," Avelin said quietly. Dane didn't look up. "A long time ago." "You were military," she said. He tightened a bolt on the stabilizer. "I served under your husband." Avelin's markings brightened in a sharp, stunned pulse. "You fought in his forces." "For a few years," Dane said, "before the war turned into something I didn't want to be part of." Avelin watched him with new eyes. "You never told me." "You never asked," he said. They boarded the Wayfarer. Lira strapped herself in with steady hands. Kael climbed into the seat beside her, gripping Dane's sleeve until the harness clicked into place. Avelin took the co-pilot's seat, her posture straight, her markings bright with tension. "My ship is holding position off the planet," she said. "They'll intercept once we clear the atmosphere." Dane powered the engines. "Hold on." The Wayfarer lifted from the ground in a smooth rise. The settlement shrank beneath them, unchanged and unbothered the way it always had been. No one looked up. No one pointed. No one reacted. The world stayed quiet, untouched by the danger closing in. Dane felt a tightness in his chest as the land fell away. He had built a life here. He had raised the children here. Leaving felt like tearing something loose, but staying would have destroyed it. The first hostile ping hit the Wayfarer as they broke through the cloud layer. Avelin checked her display. "They have a lock." "Not for long," Dane said. He cut the main thrusters and dropped the ship into a sharp dive, skimming the lower atmosphere before pulling into a steep climb. The Wayfarer shuddered, but Dane's hand stayed steady on the controls. Avelin stared at him. "You fly like a combat pilot." "I was one," he said. He banked hard, cutting across the hostile ship's scanning arc. The Wayfarer slipped through the gap before the enemy could adjust. Lira gripped her harness, her markings flickering in a mix of fear and awe. "Dane." "It's all right," he said. "I've got you." Kael's glow brightened at the sound of his voice. Avelin watched the exchange, and something inside her shifted. Avelin's ship appeared on the scanner. "They're here," she said. "They'll shield us." Dane nodded. "Good, because they're not giving up." The vessels closed in behind them, but Avelin's ship moved into position, blocking the line of fire and guiding the Wayfarer toward the jump corridor. Avelin's markings shifted in a sharp, focused pattern. "We'll make it," she said. "We will," Dane replied. The Wayfarer shot into the lane, the hostile ships following close behind. They were leaving the world they knew. They were heading toward Avelin's home. And the enemy was coming with them. Avelin watched Dane at the helm, the children steadying under his voice, and she understood something she had not seen clearly until now. He was not the man she thought he was. He was far more. And she could not imagine facing what came next without him. Dane kept his hands steady on the controls as the Wayfarer moved through the jump corridor. The ship hummed beneath him, familiar and responsive, the way it always had been. Avelin's vessel held position just ahead, its shields angled to cover their path. The ship stayed close behind, their signatures sharp and relentless on the scanner. Lira watched the display from her seat, her markings shifting in a tense rhythm. Kael held onto his sleeve, his glow faint but steady. Avelin sat beside Dane, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the readings in front of her. "They're not falling back," she said. Avelin's markings dimmed in a slow, controlled pattern. "My ship is calling for reinforcements. We'll have support when we reach the outer range of my world." Dane nodded. "Good, we'll need it." The Wayfarer shuddered as the coup vessels adjusted their angle. He shifted the ship's trajectory, guiding it through a narrow gap in the corridor's drift. The move bought them a few seconds, nothing more, but it kept the enemy from locking onto their engines. Avelin watched him with a quiet intensity. "You fly like someone who has done this under fire." "I have," Dane said, "more times than I wanted to." Lira looked at him, her markings flickering in a mix of fear and trust. "Are we going to be okay?" she said. Dane felt the words settle deep. "I'll keep you safe," he said, "all of you." Avelin's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than before. The jump corridor opened into open space. Avelin's home world appeared ahead, a pale sphere with wide oceans and bright continents. The sight hit Dane harder than he expected. He had not seen a world like this in years, structured, guarded, alive with distant traffic. Avelin's ship moved into a protective arc around the Wayfarer. "We're entering the outer range," she said. "My forces will meet us soon." The coup vessels broke from the corridor behind them, their engines flaring bright. They closed the distance with sharp, aggressive precision. Avelin's wrist device chimed. She listened, her markings brightening in a sharp pulse. 2 royal interceptors are approaching. They'll engage the ships. Dane kept the Wayfarer steady as the first interceptor swept past them. The second followed, its engines burning hot as it moved to block the enemy's path. The enemy vessels opened fire. Avelin's ship absorbed the first volley, its shields flaring. The interceptors returned fire, forcing the enemy to break formation. The clash was brief, sharp, and controlled, not a full battle, but enough to push the ships back toward the edge of the system. Dane guided the Wayfarer toward the safe lane leading to the planet's surface. "They're falling back," he said. "For now," Avelin replied. "They'll regroup." Lira leaned forward. "Are we going home?" Avelin looked at her children, her markings softening. "Yes," she said, "we're going home." Kael's glow brightened in a small, hopeful pulse. A transmission came through from Avelin's ship. Avelin listened, her posture tightening. "They recovered a data core from one of the ship's vessels," she said. "It contains encrypted logs." Dane glanced at her. "What kind of logs?" "Orders," Avelin said. "Movement records, communications, and something else." Her markings dimmed in a heavy, pained rhythm. "What is it?" Dane asked. Avelin looked at him, her voice low. "Evidence that ties this faction to the night my husband was killed." Lira's markings flickered in confusion. "The night we left." "Yes," Avelin said. "The night everything changed." Dane felt the weight of her words settle across the cabin. The truth was finally surfacing, piece by piece, and it would change everything once they reached the surface. Avelin turned her gaze back to the planet ahead. "This is only the beginning," she said. Dane nodded. "Then we face it together." Avelin's markings brightened in a slow, steady pulse. "Together," she said. The Wayfarer descended toward the Queen's home world. The enemy's ships fell back, but not defeated, the truth rising behind them like a shadow that had waited years to be seen. The Wayfarer settled onto the landing platform with a soft jolt. Dane powered down the engines while Avelin watched the approach of her escort teams through the forward screen. The children stayed close, their markings bright with nerves as the ramp lowered into the open air of a world they had not seen since infancy. Avelin stepped out first. The guards waiting for her froze at the sight of the children, their posture shifting from protocol to stunned recognition. Dane followed with Lira and Kael at his side, and the guards' confusion deepened. Avelin's voice cut through it before anyone could speak. "They stay with me," she said, "and with him." The guards bowed and stepped aside. Inside the palace, the corridors were wide and quiet, lit by soft panels that cast a steady glow across polished stone. Lira studied everything with cautious interest. Kael held Dane's hand, his glow steadying only when Dane squeezed back. Avelin led them into a private chamber where her advisors waited. Their expressions tightened the moment they saw Dane, but Avelin didn't give them time to question it. "The coup followed me to the frontier," she said. "They will try again." One advisor stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we must secure the children immediately, and the human." Avelin's markings brightened in a sharp, controlled pulse. "That human," Dane called her, "protected them for years. He remains with them." The advisor fell silent. Avelin activated a display on the central table. A recovered data core flickered to life, showing fragments of encrypted orders and movement logs. Dane recognized the structure of the files, military, precise, the kind used by officers who expected their orders to be followed without question. Avelin watched the fragments with a stillness that carried more weight than anger. "This confirms the faction's involvement in the king's death," she said. "They planned the strike. They planned the escape pod interception. They planned to erase my children." Lira moved closer to Dane, her markings dimming. Kael pressed against his side, silent. Dane rested a hand on Kael's shoulder. "You're safe," he said quietly. Avelin looked at the three of them, the children leaning into him, Dane steady and grounded. The family bond formed far from this world, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, not confusion, something deeper, something she had been holding back since the moment she saw them together on the frontier. Avelin dismissed the advisors and waited until the door sealed behind them before speaking again. "You walked into danger for them," she said. "You left your home without hesitation. You flew through fire with a skill I did not know you had." Dane shook his head. "I did what I had to." "You did more than that," Avelin said. Her markings softened, the glow warm and steady. "You gave them a life, you gave them strength, you gave them a father." Kael looked up at Dane at the word, his glow brightening in a soft pulse. Avelin watched the moment with a quiet breath. "I cannot take them from you," she said, "and I will not." Dane met her eyes. "What happens now?" Avelin looked toward the window, where the distant lights of her world shimmered across the horizon. "Now we rebuild, and we do it together." She didn't reach for him, she didn't step closer, she didn't need to. Her markings held a warmth she had not shown anyone in years, a quiet shift, steady and unmistakable, even if she had not yet named it. The faction was still out there. The truth about the king's death was rising. The future was uncertain. But the family they had become was real. And Avelin knew she wanted Dane in the life ahead. Avelin walked with Lira and Kael through the palace's upper corridor, the soft light reflecting off the tall windows as attendants bowed in silence. The children stayed close to Dane, their markings flickering in uncertain rhythms. Avelin slowed her steps, sensing their unease. "There is something you both need to understand," she said, keeping her voice steady. "This world, it is your home, and one day it will be your responsibility. You are the heirs of Asterion, the next generation of rulers." Lira's markings dimmed in a startled pulse. Kael looked up at her, confused. "Rulers?" Avelin nodded. "Yes, not today, not soon. But this palace, these people, they look to our family for guidance. That is why everything feels so large, so formal. It was built for the role you were born into." Lira moved a little closer to Dane. "We didn't grow up here." "I know," Avelin said, "and I don't expect you to become something new overnight. You will learn at your own pace. You will grow into it, and you will not do it alone." Her gaze shifted to Dane for a brief moment before she continued walking. The nursery wing opened before them, bright and carefully arranged. Shelves lined the walls. Soft lights glowed overhead. Everything was perfect, untouched, and unfamiliar. Lira stepped inside first, her posture tight. Kael stayed behind Dane's leg, his glow dimming as he looked around the room. Avelin watched them take in the space. The room was beautiful, but it held none of the life they knew. No worn tools, no uneven stone walls, No small beds built by Dane's hands. It was a room prepared for heirs, not children who had lived on a frontier world. Lira turned to Avelin. Do we have to stay here? Only if you want to, Avelin said. Kael pressed closer to Dane. His glow steadied only when he knelt beside him. We can stay together, he said, wherever that is. Avelin dismissed the attendants with a quiet gesture. When the room was empty, she turned to Dane. They are not ready for this, she said. Not yet. It's a lot, he replied. It is more than that, Avelin said. They have lived one life for years. They cannot be expected to step into another overnight. Lira moved to the window, watching the city below. Kael stayed beside Dane. Avelin felt the truth settle. They need stability, she said. They need someone they trust. Dane waited. Avelin drew a slow breath. I want you to stay with them, here, in the palace. Dane's posture shifted. You're sure? Yes, Avelin said. Not because of politics, not because of obligation, because they rely on you, because you are the one who kept them safe, because they see you as their father. Kael looked up at Dane at the word, his glow brightening in a soft pulse. Avelin continued, her voice steady. I cannot ask them to rebuild their lives without you beside them, and I will not. Dane nodded once, then I'll stay. Avelin felt something ease inside her, not relief, not victory, but a quiet certainty that this was the only choice that honored the children's needs. She looked at Dane, at the way the children leaned into him, at the steadiness he carried even in a world that was not his. This was the beginning of something she knew she trusted. Avelin stepped closer to the children. We will build this life together, she said, all of us. Lira's markings brightened. Kael reached for Avelin's hand, then for Dane, linking them without hesitation. Avelin felt the moment settle around them, small, quiet, and real. The first step toward a new family. Dane stood on the balcony outside the nursery wing, looking out over the city as evening settled across the towers. The lights stretched in every direction, steady and bright, nothing like the quiet darkness of the frontier. The air carried a faint hum from distant transports. Everything here moved with purpose, structure, and expectation. He felt out of place in all of it. Inside the nursery, Lira and Kael explored the shelves with cautious steps. Their markings flickered in soft, uneven pulses. Every few moments, one of them glanced toward the balcony to make sure he was still there. Avelin had left them alone for the moment, giving the children space to settle. Dane appreciated the gesture, but the silence left him with thoughts he had been avoiding since they landed. He didn't belong in a palace. He didn't belong in a world built on ceremony and lineage. He didn't belong in rooms where every wall held history he had never lived. But the children did. And they were struggling. Kael approached the balcony door, his glow dim. Are you coming back inside? Dane nodded and stepped in. I'm here. Kael took his hand without hesitation. Lira moved closer, her posture easing only when Dane stood between them and the wide room. They're bringing us clothes, Lira said, and tutors, and people who want to talk to us. Dane crouched to meet her eyes. You don't have to do everything at once. Lira's marking steadied. Will you stay with us? Dane felt the question settle deeper than he expected. If you want me to. Kael squeezed his hand. We want you. Avelin entered the room then, her steps quiet. She watched the three of them for a moment before speaking. The council will expect introductions tomorrow, only brief ones. I won't push them. Dane stood. They're overwhelmed. I know, Avelin said, and they look to you first, every time. Dane didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was visible in the way the children stayed close, in the way their markings softened when he spoke, in the way they leaned toward him without thinking. Avelin stepped closer, her voice low. I meant what I said earlier. I want you here, not as a symbol, not as a guard, as the person they trust. Dane looked at the children, then at the city beyond the window. He thought of the quiet settlement he had left behind, the life he had built, the routines that had shaped their days. He thought of the danger that had followed them, the truth that had surfaced, and the world the children were now expected to inherit. He drew a slow breath. Then I'll stay. Lira's markings brightened. Kael pressed against his side, relief clear in every pulse of his glow. Avelin nodded once, her expression steady but warm. Good, we'll take this one step at a time. Dane felt the weight of the decision settle across him, heavy, unfamiliar, but right. He didn't know how to live in a palace. He didn't know how to navigate councils or ceremonies, but he knew how to protect these children. He knew how to steady them. He knew how to be the person they reached for. And for now, that was enough. Avelin stood in the observation hall above the training courtyard, watching Dane move through the space with Lira and Kael. The courtyard was designed for young heirs, open, bright, lined with soft barriers and simple climbing structures. It should have been familiar to her children. Instead, they hovered near Dane, their markings shifting in cautious pulses as they took in the new environment. Dane didn't rush them. He walked the perimeter with them first, letting them touch the walls, the rails, the soft ground. He spoke quietly, pointing out the safest places to climb, the easiest paths to start with. Lira listened with focused attention. Kael stayed close to his side, his glow steadying each time Dane rested a hand on his shoulder. Avelin watched the three of them from above, her posture still, her markings dim with thought. She had expected Dane to feel out of place here. She had expected him to struggle with the formality, the structure, the constant presence of attendants. Instead, he moved through the palace with a calm she had not anticipated. He didn't try to fit in. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply stayed steady, and the children anchored themselves to that steadiness. Lira climbed the lowest structure first. She hesitated at the top, her markings flickering. Dane stood below her, not touching, not guiding, just present. "You've got it," he said. "Take your time." Lira climbed down with careful steps. When her feet touched the ground, her markings brightened in a proud pulse. Kael clapped once, his glow warm. Avelin felt something shift inside her, a quiet warmth she had been trying not to name. She had seen Dane protect her children. She had seen him fight for them. But this was different. This was the way he taught them, the way he steadied them, the way he made them feel safe in a world that overwhelmed them. She descended the stairs and entered the courtyard. Dane looked up as she approached, his posture relaxed, his expression open. Lira ran to her, markings bright. "I climbed," she said, "all the way up." Avelin smiled. "I saw." Kael tugged at Dane's sleeve. "Can we show her the other one?" Dane nodded. "If you want to." Avelin watched them move toward the next structure. The children stayed close to Dane, but they glanced back at her more often now, their markings brightening each time she met their eyes. They were beginning to trust this place, not because of the palace, not because of the attendants, but because Dane was here. Avelin stepped beside him as the children climbed. "You're good with them," she said quietly. Dane shrugged. "We've had a lot of practice." "It shows," Avelin said. Her markings warmed in a soft, steady glow she didn't try to hide. "They feel safe with you, and so do I." Dane looked at her surprised, but she didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The truth lived in the space between them, quiet, growing, unspoken. The children reached the top of the structure and waved down at them, their markings bright with excitement. Avelin felt the moment settle around her, warm and certain. This was not the life she had imagined, but it was becoming the life she wanted. And Dane was at the center of it. Dane noticed the shift before anyone said a word. The palace guards moved with tighter formation. Their eyes scanned corners they had ignored the day before. The air carried a quiet urgency that didn't belong in a place built on ceremony and control. Avelin met him in the corridor outside the children's study room. Her markings were dim, focused. "Intelligence reports movement in the lower districts," she said. "Coup agents, small groups, coordinated. Dane felt the familiar pull of old instincts. They're probing the city. Yes, Avelin said, and they're close enough that I've ordered the inner gates sealed. Inside the study room, Lira and Kael sat with a tutor, though neither child was focused on the lesson. Their markings flickered in anxious pulses. Kael looked up the moment Dane stepped in, relief softening his glow. Avelin dismissed the tutor. When the door closed, she knelt beside the children. There may be danger in the city, she said. You will stay with us until it passes. Lira moved closer to Dane. Are they coming here? Not yet, Dane said, but we're ready if they try. Avelin watched him as he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to reassure with empty promises. He simply stood steady, and the children steadied with him. A guard approached the doorway. Your Majesty, a breach in the east wing. Small team, they're retreating but fast. Avelin straightened. They were testing our response time. Dane nodded. They'll try again. The guard hesitated. There's more. We intercepted a transmission. They're looking for the heirs. Kael's glow dimmed. Lira reached for Dane's hand. Avelin's markings brightened in a sharp pulse. We moved them to the secure chamber. Dane lifted Kael into his arms and guided Lira with his free hand. They moved through the palace with a small escort, but Dane scanned every corridor, every balcony, every shadow. He recognized the patterns, the angles of approach, the blind spots, the places he would have used if he were the one infiltrating. Avelin noticed, you see things my guards don't. I've been on both sides of this kind of fight, Dane said. They're not here to storm the palace. They're here to grab the children and run. Avelin's jaw tightened. They will not succeed. They reached the secure chamber, a reinforced room with a single entrance and a silent locking mechanism. The children stepped inside, their markings dim but steady. Dane stayed near the door, listening to the distant hum of the palace systems. Avelin stood beside him. This is only the beginning, she said quietly. They're preparing something larger. Dane nodded. Then we prepare too. Avelin looked at him, her markings softening for a brief moment. I'm glad you're here. Dane didn't answer, but the truth was clear in the way he positioned himself between the children and the door, ready for whatever came next. The coup had made its move. The palace was no longer safe, and the final confrontation was coming. But they would face it together. The secure chamber trembled as another blast rolled through the palace. Avelin stood near the wall display, watching red markers shift across the lower corridors. Dane stayed close to the children, posture steady, eyes fixed on the door. Avelin's wrist device pulsed. Multiple breaches, she said quietly. They're pushing harder than before. Dane studied the tactical feed. Red markers moved in tight, coordinated lines. They're not probing anymore. This is their final push. Avelin nodded. They want to end this tonight. A deeper blast shook the chamber. Kael flinched, but Dane moved to him immediately, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. Lira pressed closer to Avelin, her markings flickering in sharp pulses. A guard's voice came through the comm. Your Majesty, the coup has breached the east wing. We're holding them, but they're moving with precision. Dane stepped closer to the display. They're trying to flank the guard lines. They'll hit the service tunnels next. Avelin relayed the order without hesitation. Seal the tunnels. Redirect units to the lower junction. The channel cut. Another tremor rolled through the chamber, closer this time. Dane's posture shifted, calm but alert. They're trying to reach this level, he said. Avelin looked at him. Can they? Not if your forces hold the junction, Dane said, but they'll throw everything they have at it. The comm chimed again. Your Majesty, we've cornered their leadership. They're refusing to surrender. Avelin's markings brightened. Alive, I want them alive. Another blast hit much closer. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Avelin's markings sharpened. What was that? Dane stepped forward, listening. Explosives close. Before Avelin could respond, the chamber door shook under a heavy impact. Lira gasped. Kael pressed against Dane's leg, his glow dimming. Avelin moved toward the children, but Dane raised a hand. Behind the barrier. She didn't argue. She guided Lira and Kael behind the reinforced partition as the door shook again, harder, followed by the sharp whine of a cutting charge. Avelin's voice tightened. How did they get this far? They used the vents, Dane said. Your guards sealed the tunnels, not the ducts. The door blew inward with a deafening crack. Smoke filled the entryway. 2 coup operatives rushed through the breach, weapons raised, movements sharp and practiced. Dane was already moving. He closed the distance before the first operative cleared the smoke. Avelin saw only a blur, Dane striking low, driving the attacker into the wall with enough force to knock the weapon free. The second operative swung toward the children, but Dane pivoted, intercepting him with a clean, controlled strike that sent him crashing to the floor. The first operative recovered fast, reaching for a blade. Dane caught his wrist, twisted, and drove him down again. He didn't get back up. The second tried to rise. Dane ended it with a single, precise blow. The entire fight lasted seconds. Avelin stared, breath caught in her chest. She had seen soldiers fight. She had seen guards train. She had never seen anything like this, not with such precision, such control, such absolute focus. Dane turned to the children. "You're safe," he said, voice steady. Kael ran to him, glow brightening in relief. Lira followed, markings flickering with adrenaline but steadying as Dane knelt to meet them. Avelin stepped forward, her markings shifting in a slow, stunned pulse. You fought like a soldier," Dane said quietly. "I told you, I served before the war turned ugly." Avelin held his gaze. "You didn't tell me you were this." Dane didn't answer. He didn't need to. The comm unit chimed. "Your Majesty," the captain said, breathless. "The coup leaders are in custody. The remaining forces are retreating. The palace is secure." Avelin exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. She looked at the fallen operatives, then at Dane, standing between her children and danger without hesitation. She activated the display as new data streamed in, encrypted orders, intercepted transmissions, and a final document bearing the king's seal. The truth was undeniable. The coup had orchestrated everything: the king's death, the abduction attempt, the years of chaos. Avelin's markings dimmed, then steadied. "It's over." Dane stood beside her, Kael still holding his hand. "You ended it." Avelin shook her head. "We ended it." Lira moved to her, taking her hand. Kael leaned against Dane. The 4 of them stood together in the quiet chamber, the danger fatting behind them. The coup had fallen. The palace was safe. And the family, forged in exile, danger, and trust, had survived. The palace had fallen into an exhausted quiet by the time Avelin stepped out of the command chamber. The corridors were dim, lit only by the soft glow of night panels. Guards moved with slower steps now, their posture easing as the last reports confirmed the coup's collapse. The air felt different, not safe yet, but no longer on the edge of breaking. Avelin walked toward the secure chamber where Dane had taken the children. Her markings were dim, not from fear but from the weight of everything. The truth about the king, the end of rebellion, the fight she had carried alone for years. And the man who had stood beside her, without hesitation. She paused at the chamber door before entering. Inside, the lights were low. Lira and Kael slept curled together on the reinforced bench, their markings soft and steady. Dane sat on the floor beside them, back against the wall, one arm resting loosely across his knee. He wasn't asleep, but his posture had softened, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He looked up when she stepped inside. "Everything's quiet now." Dane nodded, glancing at the children. They were out the moment things settled. They held it together longer than most adults would. Avelin moved closer, her step slow. They trust you, she said, more than anyone here. Dane didn't respond immediately. He looked at the children again, his expression unreadable but steady. They've been through too much. They shouldn't have had to. Avelin sat beside him, leaving only a small space between them. No, she said quietly. They shouldn't have, but they survived because of you. Dane shook his head. They survived because they're strong. And because you taught them how to be, Avelin said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The chamber hummed softly around them. The children breathed in slow, even rhythms. Avelin let the silence settle, not heavy, simply real. She looked at Dane, studying him in a way she hadn't allowed herself before. The steadiness, the quiet strength, the way he had moved through her world without bending to it, the way he had protected her children with a ferocity she had never seen in any of her guards, the way he had stood beside her, as if he had always belonged there. Her markings warmed in a soft, subtle glow she didn't try to hide. You saved them, she said. You saved all of us. Dane exhaled slowly. I did what I had to. Avelin shook her head. No, you did more than that. He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not confession, but recognition, a quiet truth neither of them had named yet. Avelin turned her gaze back to the children. When they wake, she said, their world will be different, safer, more stable. Dane nodded. They'll need time to adjust. They'll have it, Avelin said, and they'll have you. Dane didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Avelin felt the moment settle deep inside her, a shift she had been resisting, or perhaps simply hadn't allowed herself to see. The danger was gone. The truth was out. And now, in the quiet aftermath, she could finally feel the weight of what Dane had become to her family. Not a guardian. Something far more permanent. She didn't say it. But the truth had begun. The morning after, the palace felt different. Not calm, but steadier. The corridors were filled with quiet movement as attendants repaired damage, guards reset patrol routes, and advisors hurried between chambers with new reports. The air carried the weight of a world trying to right itself. Dane walked with Lira and Kael through the upper hall, their small hands gripping his. Their markings were brighter today. They had slept deeply, but the memory of the breach lingered in their posture. Avelin waited for them outside the council chamber. She wore formal attire for the first time since their return, not ceremonial, but authoritative. Her markings glowed in a steady, controlled pattern that signaled strength to anyone who saw her. She looked at the children first. Are you ready? Lira nodded, though her glow flickered. Kael pressed closer to Dane. Avelin's gaze shifted to him. They'll want to see the heirs, she said, to confirm the line stands. Dane nodded. I'll stay with them. Avelin hesitated, not out of doubt but recognition. They'll expect you to stand behind me, out of sight. Dane looked down at the children. Lira's grip tightened. Kael's glow dimmed at the thought of separation. They're not ready for that, Dane said. Avelin's markings warmed in a subtle pulse. I know. She turned toward the chamber doors. Then you stand with us. The doors opened, revealing the full council gathered in a semicircle. Advisors, ministers, military officers, all watching, all waiting. The room fell silent as Avelin entered with her children at her side. And Dane beside them. Whispers rippled through the chamber, not hostile, surprised, confused, trying to understand the man who stood where no outsider had ever stood. Avelin ignored them. She guided Lira and Kael to the center of the room. The children stayed close, their markings flickering but steadying each time Dane rested a hand on their shoulders. Avelin addressed the council with a voice that carried across the chamber. The coup has fallen. Its leaders are in custody. The truth of their crimes is confirmed. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. My children survived because of strength, resilience, and the man who protected them when this palace could not. Dane felt dozens of eyes shift toward him. He didn't move. He didn't bow. He simply stood steady, the children anchored to him. Avelin continued, "He will remain with them here in this palace by my decision." A murmur swept through the council, surprise, uncertainty, calculation, but no one challenged her. Not after the night they had survived. Not after the evidence she had presented. Not after seeing the heirs alive and unshaken. Lira stepped forward, her markings brightening. "We're staying together," she said, voice small but clear. Kael nodded, gripping Dane's hand. The council fell silent. Avelin looked at Dane, not as a queen assessing a subject, but as a leader acknowledging an equal in the one place she had never expected to find one. "This is our family," she said, "and this is how we move forward." Dane felt the truth of it settle inside him, heavy, real, undeniable. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He wasn't a temporary guardian. He wasn't a man passing through a world that wasn't his. He was part of this, whether he had meant to be or not. The palace had settled into a fragile calm by midday. Repairs echoed faintly through the halls, but the urgency was gone. Avelin walked the upper terrace alone, letting the cold air clear the remnants of adrenaline from her mind. Her markings glowed in a muted rhythm, steady but thoughtful. The coup was finished. The danger had passed, yet her thoughts refused to settle. She found Dane in the garden courtyard below, watching Lira and Kael explore the stone paths. The children stayed close to him, their markings brightening each time he pointed out a plant or lifted them to see a carved mural. They looked peaceful, safe, whole. Avelin paused at the railing, studying the scene with a quiet intensity. She had expected the children to cling to her after the breach. Instead, they had sought Dane first. Not because she had failed them, but because he had become something she had not fully acknowledged. He was their anchor. She descended the steps and crossed the courtyard. Dane noticed her approach and straightened slightly, but he didn't step away from the children. Lira ran to her, excited. "We found the old fountain," she said. "Dane showed us the carvings." Avelin smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "I'm glad." Kael tugged at Dane's sleeve. "Can we stay out here longer?" Dane glanced at Avelin. "If it's allowed." "It is," she said. "You're safe here." The children darted back toward the fountain. Avelin stood beside Dane, watching them. For a moment, neither spoke. "You look tired," Dane said quietly. "So do you," Avelin replied. He gave a small, tired smile. "Long night." Avelin's markings warmed. "You protected them. You protected all of us." Dane shook his head. "I did what anyone would have." "No," Avelin said, her voice low. "Not anyone." He looked at her then, and something in his expression softened, not surprise, not discomfort, but understanding. Avelin felt the truth settle inside her with a clarity she could no longer ignore. She trusted him. She relied on him. And somewhere in the chaos of the last days, he had become essential to her life in a way she had not expected. Avelin exhaled slowly. "I'm grateful you're here," she said, "more than I can say." Dane didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The realization was quiet, steady, undeniable. This man was no longer just the one who saved her children. He was becoming the one she could not imagine this world without. The afternoon light filtered through the high windows of the family hall, casting soft patterns across the polished floor. Dane sat with Lira and Kael at a low table, helping them sort through a scattered pile of carved learning tiles. The children were calmer today, their markings steady, but they stayed close to him in a way that felt different, not fearful, not clinging, but certain. Kael leaned against his arm as he arranged the tiles into simple sequences. Lira watched him with quiet focus, her glow brightening each time he nodded in approval. Dane felt the weight of the last days easing from their small shoulders, replaced by something steadier. Avelin entered the hall quietly. She paused near the doorway, watching them without speaking. Dane didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on Kael, who was trying to place a tile upside down. "That way," Dane said gently, turning it for him. "See the ridge, it lines up here." Kael nodded, markings warming in a soft pulse. "You always know." Dane smiled. "I've had practice." Lira shifted closer. "Are you staying with us today?" "Of course," Dane said. "Where else would I be?" Lira hesitated, then spoke with a seriousness far beyond her years. "We want you to stay always." Dane froze. Kael nodded immediately, pressing his forehead against Dane's arm. "We don't want you to go back to the other world. This is our home now. You're part of it." Avelin stepped forward then, her markings brightening in a slow, warm pulse. Dane looked up, startled to find her there, but she didn't interrupt. She simply watched the children, her expression softening in a way he rarely saw. Lira reached for Avelin's hand and pulled her closer. "He's ours," she said. "He belongs with us." Avelin knelt beside them, her gaze shifting between her children and the man they clung to. "Is that what you both want?" she asked. Kael nodded without hesitation. "He makes us safe." Lira added, "And he makes us feel whole." Dane felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but the quiet realization that the children weren't asking for comfort. They were stating a truth they had already accepted. Avelin looked at Dane, her voice low. "They've made their choice." Dane didn't know what to say. He only knew that the children's hands were still on him, warm and steady, and that Avelin's gaze held no doubt. In that moment, the shape of the family became clear, not through decree, not through duty, but through the simple, undeniable certainty of two children who knew exactly where he belonged. And Avelin did not disagree. The palace quieted as evening settled across the upper halls. Avelin dismissed the last of her advisors and walked alone toward the private wing. The day had been long, filled with reports, stabilizing orders, and the council's shifting expectations. Yet none of it weighed on her as heavily as the thought of the man waiting with her children. She found Dane in the small reading chamber, the one the children favored. Lira slept curled against his side, a book still open beside her. Kael lay across his lap, markings dim with deep rest. Dane sat still, careful not to disturb them, his expression soft in a way she rarely saw. Avelin stepped inside and closed the door quietly. Dane looked up, but he didn't move. He simply nodded, acknowledging her presence without breaking the children's peace. "They wouldn't sleep unless you stayed," Avelin said. "They tried, but they kept checking the door," he said. Avelin approached slowly, her markings warming. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the quiet heat of his presence. For a moment, she watched her children breathe. Then she looked at Dane. "You've changed everything," she said softly. Dane frowned slightly. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Avelin said. "That's why it matters." He held her gaze steady and unguarded. She felt the truth rising inside her, not suddenly, but inevitable. A truth she had been circling for days, maybe longer. "You are not here because I asked. You are here because my children chose you. And because her voice tightened, but she didn't look away. Because I need you here." Dane's breath caught, but he didn't speak. Avelin continued, her markings brightening in a slow, vulnerable pulse. "I trust you more than anyone in this palace. I rely on you. And when I think of the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Dane's expression shifted, not shock, not discomfort, but something deeper, something that mirrored her own realization. Avelin reached out, not to touch him, but to rest her hand beside his on the bench, close enough that the space between them felt intentional, chosen. "This is a truth," she said quietly, "one I will not hide anymore." Dane nodded once, slow and uncertain. "Then I won't hide mine either." They kissed. The palace grounds were quieter now, filled with the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Workers restored shattered stone, gardeners replanted the scorched courtyards, and sunlight finally reached places long shadowed by fear. Dane walked the path beside Avelin while Lira and Kael ran ahead, chasing each other between newly planted trees. Avelin watched them with a calm she hadn't felt in years. "They're healing," she said. "They all are," Dane replied. The children called for them, waving from the steps of the restored fountain. Avelin took Dane's hand without hesitation as they joined them. No distance between them, just a family choosing the same direction. The future wasn't fully rebuilt yet, but it was theirs to shape together.